So, like David, actually, for those of you who, I know a lot of folks in the room, but don't know, I actually spent 2 cycles through the government. First, for about 30 plus years at the IRS, and I want to talk about my IRS experience because it's really germane to the topic today, especially around payroll. And then actually got to work with Michelle, I guess, for about 2.5 years when I joined the second part of the second term of the Obama administration. And one of the, I think, lessons learned for me over like 30 years is that progress is slow in the government. I think, lots of folks, I think, acknowledge that today. But I can actually tell you I am incredibly optimistic about where we are as a government today. My experience with payroll goes back more than 30 years. When I was working at the IRS, and I was assigned for a couple of years at the IRS Detroit Computing Center, which basically handled the non-tax processing. So it handled a lot of back office functions, but also handled a lot of compliance operations. And I can tell you, I remember, back then, I mean, IRS had at the time 145,000 employees, and I can tell you, inevitably, every other Sunday afternoon, I would inevitably get a call at home saying that we were having problems with the payroll operation. People weren't getting paid. We didn't actually get the time cards in from, whatever offices. And then once we actually, I think to David's point, once we actually got all that data, we actually, spun all that into 9-track tapes. Remember those? And actually put them in a car and drove them to the Detroit airport to fly them to the Treasury Dispersing Center and hope that the planes actually were getting out on time and not grounded because of bad weather in the wintertime. And then sort of fast forward to my OMB experience. I got there in the summer of 2014, and probably about 6 months after I got there, the deputy director for management at OMB, Beth Colbert, called me and said, hey, look, we have a problem. We forgot as a federal employer that we need to actually be compliant with the ACA, the Affordable Health Care, and we have like 6 months to become compliant. And Michelle will sort of remember the effort that it took during that time to actually get the 5 payroll centers, because since 2000 we went from 26 to 5 payroll providers to actually get all of those changes made. And they had to do it 5 different times because we had 5 different payroll providers and 5 different legacy systems that were really not interoperable. So yes, we could create test scripts, but everybody had to do their own programming 5 different times. So where we are today is, I think, in a really good place. And it's going to take us, probably the next 5+ years to make the migration to a modernized payroll system, which, to Jason's point, I think, as an employer, your employees sort of expect that they're going to get paid timely and they're going to get paid accurately. And if we don't do that as an employer, then you have to wonder whether our employers are going to say, if they can't even get something as basic as payroll done correctly, are they actually going to get my career in the right place? And do I really want to stay here as an employee? So I would say that getting sort of the core basics of getting people paid on time and properly is really key to the workforce of the future and attracting people to come to the federal government as an employer. I want to ask Michelle to talk a little bit about her operation, the Interior Business Center. I know we're focused on payroll, Michelle, but I think it would be good to talk about the complexity of the operation that you run, because for those of you who don't know IBC, I mean, they are a multi-agency service provider for payroll, but a lot of other activities that are very critical to departments and agencies and bureaus in their delivery of their mission. So Michelle, you want to talk maybe a little bit about the background, and then we can talk about the journey that we've been on.
Sure, thanks, Dave. And thanks for having me. At the Interior Business Center, we have 3 main lines of business: acquisition, financial management, and then our human resources directorate, which is the main one we're here to talk about today. And in that directorate, we provide quite a bit more than simply payroll. We are HR service providers. We do drug and alcohol testing, personnel security, as well as the full kind of end-to-end cradle-to-grave personnel servicing. The payroll is the centerpiece in the sense, of course, that, as I say, gross to net, accurate, on time, every time is what it's about. And making that happen is the cornerstone. But the customer service experience is something that IBC has been relentlessly focused on for a number of years, its entire existence, but really hitting that much heavier and with a much greater focus over the last decade, so that it is enter data once, it populates the other systems. And I think that's a focus we need to widen our discussion about as we turn to new pay. And it's tough to follow a dynamic speaker like the one that preceded us. And I don't have a teenager, but I have a toddler. So that could get, I have some interesting stories to tell there. Remarkably similar, I think. But what I think I have faith in is the 10%. It's there. It's real. It's adaptable. It's that 90% in the federal government. Though I do think we have regulations and reasons. The reasons to not make it happen, the reasons not to adopt. What we do have is a unique opportunity to collaborate. I am not a competitor of the National Finance Center or DFAS or GSA. I am a colleague. I am a fellow civil servant, and I am here to collaborate to bring about the next generation of payroll servicing. And our focus on that 90% needs to be renewed, reinvigorated, and reimagined. I'm a mediator, facilitator, coach, trained public participation specialist. And so I see right now the collaboration that we need to have in the room together, at the table together, to see full and robust development and implementation of new pay is where we need to be focused. And improving that is job one. And I think we need to do better. I think we can do better, but I think we need to start now. And being fellow civil servants, collaborators, and colleagues, as opposed to competitors, puts us in a really unique and positive place where we can make that happen.
Michelle, can you talk a little bit about, since you've been running, a legacy system for years, right, and successfully, right? People, I think, don't appreciate the complexity of managing, multiple agency customers, and the complexity. It's not just that we have one pay system. We have multiple titles. We have people that work full-time, part-time, seasonal. And you sort of see all of that in your customer base. And when you think about, how do I go about transitioning from the as-is state to the to-be state, what do you think the 3 or 4 major challenges are going to be for IBC, and then likewise for your customer agencies as they prepare to go on this journey with you, because you can't do it alone?
Well, I do think the unprecedented 35-day government shutdown gave a highlight into some of those complexities to a much wider audience than had been aware of them before. So I think we could all share some war stories from earlier this year and agree that the multiple pay types, we pay 300,000 people, but it's 60 plus different pay types within that, within that set of employees. And each brings its own unique set of rules about pay, overtime, deductions, that whole experience. I would hope that's a system, technology, programming issue. However, the requirements on the front end are pretty complex, I believe. The other piece of it is the interoperability and the connectivity to multiple systems, multiple finance systems, multiple time and attendance systems, multiple personnel security systems, other departmental systems. That's going to be a huge hurdle, because if we're going to standardize more as we move towards new pay implementation, it's going to require folks to give up some of their unique systems they have. And talking about standardizing in any place where there's not a statutory or regulatory requirement for the unique offering, it's easy to say, it's very hard to do, that change management piece. So that's why I think the collaboration up front is going to be, needs to be made much more robust, so that we're all in the room together, not having the one-on-one conversations separately. And finally, money, funding. Is this going to be funded through the existing providers, through GSA, through each agency, or in one large appropriation? I think there are challenges with each of those approaches. I think there are lessons learned from other implementations, but the funding process for this, and then the transparency into how that money is being spent and the success it is actually delivering, is going to be a big hurdle for us and for all of the providers. The last piece is a little bit unique to the Interior Business Center, which is our fully integrated system right now would have to be broken apart to just allow for upgrade to a payroll system. And in doing so, the question is, do we remain a provider for those other small modules? Are new ones created? Are the agencies going to have to take on that work themselves, the agencies being our agency customers? Or are we really going to sit down and plan for the end-to-end solution so that our step forward doesn't take us 2 steps back and potentially leave us there, which is also something that happens with new system implementations that I believe presents a huge risk.
I mean, you've mentioned, and I think our speakers have touched on this multiple times, is, as a provider, you can't do it by yourself. I mean, you're not going to do it to an agency and their employees. It's a collaboration. It's a partnership. Are there things that you could talk to the audience about? I mean, because I think you probably have a few customers here, from IBC. What can they be doing in starting to think about the preparation that they need to take in order to actually have a successful implementation over time? Because, I dare say that, yes, funding, I agree, is going to be an issue. And that's why I said early on, this is going to take us 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years to make a migration of, 2 million federal employees to a new system. I actually think that time is important to us in preparing the workforce, the employees, your customers, and your own staff in entering into this new way of doing business?
I think the first thing has to be each provider working intensely with each customer to collect and fully document a robust set of requirements and validating those, that they are statutorily and regulatorily required. I think some of that's begun. Some of it we know because we're already providing the service. Some of it would be a validation of what we already have, but really modernizing and updating those sets of requirements and a full analysis of the needs. And through doing that, I think the complexity in some areas will be understood. But honestly, I think the simplicity in others might be understood, because we're not the same workforce, the same provider, the same leadership that implemented a system 30 years ago. We know more, we know better, we can do better, and we want to look towards the next the next level of service. I think we're all eager to have some more modern tools, to go to an app on our phone and enter time or approve leave or check the status of things. That's absolutely where we all want to be. So I think there's an eagerness, and I think the number one thing we can do is be meeting, gathering those requirements, and collecting those in a way that we can build a true and successful implementation plan. So the complicating factor in that as well is the bandwidth, the workforce. When you are, say, full cost recovery, I have no appropriated dollars, we budget 2 and 3 years out. None of my customers have budgeted for the extra staff to sit with me and build these requirements. I have to bill them for it if I provide the service. So I think we're at the cusp of, with OMB's help and hopefully the appropriators' help, of getting an appropriation that would allow us to staff up to do that. That's one hurdle that I think we can and will clear. And that will be, I think, the watershed moment when we actually have the people who can sit down and start that very technical piece of collecting the requirements. And I think that's also going to create the artifacts that can create confidence throughout the federal government that this can be done. But what it's going to take is the staff and the expertise in place. This isn't something that can just be kicked over to another agency or handled solely by the private sector. I feel strongly that the feds and supporting contractors now that are delivering the service are the absolute key to success, because their knowledge of the existing systems and processes is the bedrock on which we can build new pay. And without that, it will not succeed.
What do you say, Michelle, to the skeptics that would say, this is too big, the government has never undertaken a project of this scale across, all the departments within the federal government. What's your response to the skeptics who would sort of doubt that we actually can accomplish this?
My answer would be what I just gave. If we collaborate, if we use all of our existing talent, and we continue to build on this together with transparency, creating an environment where we can surface problems and not just be afraid to not meet deadlines and not report. If we're all working on a dashboard and we're so eager to turn in a dashboard with a bunch of greens and everybody's afraid of a yellow, and God forbid you put a red on there and send it up to OMB or GSA. If we operate in that place of fear of transparency as to the challenges and the needs, it will fail. Why I think it's possible is that I think we can lay the framework and a true full collaborative, full participation process using the existing talents and skills we have, communicating with our employees, making them not afraid of what's coming, but empowering them to participate. That's why I think it's possible. If we think we can just, like I said, kick it to one agency to do it, or kick it to the private sector and say, come with a solution and we'll flip the switch and make this happen, that absolutely not. But if we use the talent and the expertise on board, both on our customer end and on our provider end, and we do it together, I think that will be different. I think there are examples across the world, some to our friends in the north who are struggling because they wanted to immediately show savings of reducing the workforce, providing payroll. That cannot be our focus, because we will need all hands on deck to make this a success. And I think that's what we can do different.
Great. I know we are almost out of time, so how about 1 or 2 questions for Michelle?
Part of what I'm doing is talking nonstop. I have started weekly meetings, monthly virtual town halls with the entire leadership team, all managers and supervisors nationwide. I've started a new newsletter. I have send regular email updates. I talk about it at our all hands, and I've been incredibly transparent from day one in my involvement in this, going back about 3 years ago, 3.5 when I started this job. So that's been the one thing I can do. I honestly answer questions when I say I don't know. I say I don't know. I mean, I give that honesty and build that trust, and I speak to the fear. I absolutely, I acknowledge it. And I think we have an additional risk, of course, we've been talking about it for a long time, of an aging workforce as well. When I look at my retirement eligibles, that makes me probably more nervous than the loss of employees due to fear. We do a lot to hire and train and promote from within, and that's been a successful model. And I think showing people those opportunities still exist has been a major effort and something that has helped us a lot as well. The other thing is, I remind everyone that as a federal shared service provider, full cost recovery with customers who, prior to the OMB memo, could leave at any time, we operate in a space of more uncertainty than some other federal offices. Because if a big customer left and I was suddenly overstaffed, how am I going to manage that? So we operate with a mind towards that on a routine basis. This is just at a heightened level from that.
Time for one more.
Yeah, Michelle, great discussion. But my question is, as far as HR personnel, how does it affect payroll accounting in your agency?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the...
As far as HR and payroll is concerned, how does it affect payroll accounting in your agency?
In my agency at Interior, or
in your department?
Well, the Interior Business Center does payroll for the Department of the Interior. That is one of our customers, our home agency, and we are the HR servicing office for a number of offices within DOI, but not the entire operation. So Interior will be in the same boat as every other agency as a customer migrating to new pay, and that's a benefit to us because we are able to have the discussion with our parent agency and gain their support for this effort, and that's a big customer for us to be able to be have on board in a positive way.
I mean, I think the fact that we have sufficient time for implementation and that it's not like, you know, we have to get this done in a year or two, it actually, I think, allows the shared service providers, but also the agencies, to actually step back once we have a, you know, sort of a timeline and develop the kind of human capital strategy that you need for retention of people. And I go back to an IRS experience I had. I was involved in the late 80s in developing the first concept of filing online, right? And I remember some early presentations to the then CIO, because we were all mainframe at the time, and we said, like, we had this like really cool idea of letting people file on the internet with their computers. And I remember the CIO going like, you know, this internet thing, this is the passing fad, you know? There's no future in this internet, we're mainframe. And yet today, you know, how many people in this room actually still file a paper return? I mean, we went from 0 electronic to 130 million. And you know what? We used to hire 45,000 seasonals a year to process paper returns. We never riffed a person. because we had like an 8-year window to roll this out. And we redeployed people, we used Vera, we used VISIP, we used a lot of retention allowances because we had a lot of core people that we just couldn't afford to leave. So I think for agencies, it's like you can plan how to sort of manage that human capital impact over time.
And I think you can plan as long as, once again, we're collaborating all along the way so that realistic timelines are set and publicized and shared, and there's a transparency about that. What we don't want is to do this, oh, it will be implemented by 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. That death by 1,000 cuts is part of what contributes to the fear. But if you're really sit down and you're honest about the timeline and you lay it out, I think that right there, you're exactly right, is going to make people go, oh, well, I have 5 or 7 years left in my career. This is going to be potentially an exciting challenge to go out on. I'm along for the ride. That's a much different conversation than the new system's going to be implemented, everything's going to one agency in 2 years, and what am I going to do? I'm not retirement eligible in 2 years. Am I going to be RIF'd? And that's part of how this has started. We need to course correct that immediately.
Okay, well, all right, one last one.
Sorry. Now, my understanding with the new pay initiative is that all payroll providers will work with SAP to implement an interface into the system. Is that incorrect, or are we trying to go down to one payroll provider?
I don't want to speak for the administration. I don't think they envision one payroll provider. In fact, I think from a risk perspective, that would be high risk. I think the fact that like right now we have 5 payroll providers, right? But there is no interoperability between those payroll providers. So if, God forbid there was a disaster in Michelle's primary facility and fallback facility, 300,000+ people would be in jeopardy. So I think you're always going to have, multiple providers, multiple locations, just from a fail-safe perspective.
And there's 2 vendor teams on the BPA at GSA, and that will operate under GSA's management as to how competition amongst those 2 teams on the BPA operate. And the next phase of what we're doing, I can speak from a provider perspective, is submitting an updated implementation plan, which will speak to the steps we need to take, or will be looking to take in the near term, to move to one or both of those common systems. So that's the first step, and I do think that keeping our eyes on those goals and that time horizon is where the focus is now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Michelle,
I
David, thank
appreciate
you.
it.